Mia, Jayden, and Ava Walters were just names on a forgotten mailbox. The three children no one noticed had vanished behind the doors of a crumbling brown house. For nearly 3 years they lived alone, surviving on stale crackers, melted ice cubes, and the fading hope that their mother, Shana Walters, would come back. But Shana hadn't disappeared. She had moved on, living under a new name with a new boyfriend in a new city, pretending her children never existed. What unfolded next shocked the nation and exposed a haunting question. How can a mother walk away and no one see the warning signs until it's too late? Maple Street was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of place. It was quiet, familiar, and boring in a way that made people feel safe. The lawns were trimmed in straight lines, the mailboxes freshly painted, and children's bikes were parked neatly by the sidewalk. Everyone knew who lived where, what time the mail came, and when the garbage truck would pass. But at the very end of the cul-de-sac, there was one house that gradually faded from memory. It didn't start out that way. The brown house used to have flower pots on the porch, chalk drawings on the driveway, and the sound of kids laughing in the backyard. But little by little, things changed. The flowers dried up. The chalk dust washed away. The laughter stopped. The house wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't quite alive either. The blinds never opened, no lights turned on at night, and the front yard turned wild with weeds. For a while, the neighbors speculated quietly. Maybe the family was going through something. Maybe the mother worked long hours. Maybe they'd moved and no one noticed, but someone still lived there. Behind the closed blinds and locked doors, 3 children were surviving in total silence. Mia was 12 the day the front door closed for the last time. Jayden was 9 and obsessed with dinosaurs. Baby Ava had just turned 3 and still needed help getting dressed. Their mother, Shana Walters, had once been present, maybe not perfect, but there. Then, without warning, she was gone. It started slowly, like a shadow creeping across a sunny wall. Shana would leave for a day or two and return with fast food and excuses. She'd claim she had to stay with a friend or work late. Then she stopped offering reasons. She would leave without explanation, without a return date, until her visits became rare and unpredictable. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The mailbox filled up, flyers and coupons piled on the porch. Neighbors stopped waving. They assumed the children were staying with their father, though no one had ever actually seen him. No one thought to ask. Inside, the children learned to adapt. Mia, the oldest, took charge. She organized what little food they had, taught Jayden from an old workbook, and rocked Ava to sleep when she cried. She counted cans in the pantry and marked dates on a wall calendar. In her head, she kept track of everything: how much milk was left, how many diapers remained, how many days since the lights last worked. She didn't panic. She planned. Each day was a tightrope walk. If they were too loud, someone might knock. If the curtains shifted, someone might look inside. If anyone realized they were alone, they could be taken away, split up. That, for Mia, was the worst possible outcome. She couldn't let that happen, so they lived quietly. The TV was kept low, the door was never opened. When food ran out, Mia waited until the dead of night to sneak out to the corner store, carrying coins and hoping no one recognized her. Still, something about the house unsettled people. Delivery drivers said it gave them a strange feeling. One neighbor claimed she heard crying at odd hours. Another swore she saw a flicker of candlelight in the middle of the night. But no one did anything. It was easier to ignore the strange house. Easier to assume someone else would check. But the children inside were not ghosts. They were real. They were growing older in the dark, and the longer they stayed hidden, the more invisible they became. The silence surrounding the house wasn't just a sign of neglect. It was a warning. Something was terribly wrong, and no one saw it until it was too late. Shana Walters didn't vanish in a dramatic way. There was no fight, no goodbye, no final message scribbled on a note. She just faded out of her children's lives like a cloud slowly drifting from the sky. At first, she still came back. The kids would hear her heels clack on the porch, the door creak open, the sound of plastic bags rustling with a few groceries. Then she'd leave again, sometimes after a night, sometimes after only an hour. She never gave them answers, never asked how they were managing. She came and went like a visitor, never a mother. Then one day she stopped coming altogether. No explanation, just silence. What the children didn't know was that Shana had started a new life 200 miles away in a different city. She'd met a man online, Eric Delson, a long-haul truck driver who lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment near the outskirts of town. To him, Shana was exciting, spontaneous, free. She told him she had no children, said she'd never been tied down, never had to worry about anyone but herself. She even told him she'd lost her family years ago in an accident. An easy lie, too far from the truth to be questioned. Eric never suspected anything. When Shana moved in, she seemed perfect for his lifestyle. She didn't ask questions when he left for days. She had no one checking on her, no obligations. She was always available, always there. That's what made her so appealing. When Eric drove across the country in his rig, Shana turned their tiny apartment into her new universe. She spent hours on social media, carefully crafting a version of herself that looked nothing like the truth. Her feed was filled with filtered selfies, wine glasses, and romantic captions. Sunset walks, brunch, lazy mornings in bed. People scrolling through her page saw a carefree woman living her best life. What she didn't show were the moments she remembered Mia's face, or Jayden's quiet questions, or Ava's small hand reaching for hers. Those memories came late at night, and even then she buried them under a thick layer of justification. She told herself they were fine. Mia was smart, resourceful. They didn't need her every day. They were probably better off without her. In the beginning, she sent money, a little cash hidden under the welcome mat, a bag of canned food left on the back step. But the visits became more spaced out, the drops more careless. The money eventually stopped altogether, and as the years passed, so did her guilt. Mia, meanwhile, had no idea where her mother had gone. She checked the door every morning, hoping to see a familiar figure pulling into the driveway, but the car never came. The porch remained empty. Each day stretched longer than the last. The fridge grew emptier. The nights got colder. Mia kept a notebook where she wrote things she needed to remember, things a parent might know. What to do if Jayden's cough got worse, how to make formula if Ava got sick, what number to call if the house flooded. But there was no adult to call, no one to ask. They became shadows in their own home. Jayden stopped asking when their mom would return. Ava stopped calling out for her, and Mia stopped waiting at the window. What they didn't know was that their mother had erased them completely, not only from her new boyfriend's life, but from her own. As the months bled into years, the brown house at the end of Maple Street became a secret sealed tight behind locked doors, and outside, no one noticed a thing. It was just after 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday when everything began to unravel. The skies were overcast, and the air held a heavy stillness. Inside the house at the end of Maple Street, Mia was pacing. Jayden lay on the couch, pale and shivering, his forehead slick with sweat. The fever had come on fast. One minute he was playing with his old dinosaur figures, and the next he was barely able to sit up. Mia had tried everything she could think of: cool cloths, ice chips, even crushing up the last of some expired Tylenol she'd found in the back of a drawer. But nothing worked. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were glazed. She stared at the cupboards, empty except for a few cans of beans and a box of baking soda. The medicine cabinet was even worse. Band-aids, an old toothbrush, nothing helpful. Panic crept in, sharp and breathless. Mia had held things together for so long. Through winter cold, summer heat, hunger, and fear, she had stayed strong. But now, with her little brother burning up on the couch and her baby sister whining for juice they didn't have, her strength started to crack. She had always told herself they could survive as long as no one knew they were alone. That was the rule. The only rule. Keep quiet, keep hidden, never ask for help. But now, for the first time, the rule felt like a trap. Jayden needed medicine. He needed a doctor, and they had no one. So Mia made a choice. She found a hoodie in a pile of old clothes and pulled it over her head. She scooped Ava into her arms and tucked the few crumpled dollar bills she'd hidden under the floorboard into her sock. Jayden didn't say a word as she left. He just nodded weakly, trusting her, because that's what he'd learned to do. The store was only 6 blocks away, but every step felt like a risk. Ava clung to her tightly, her little legs wrapped around Mia's waist. They passed houses with trimmed lawns and parked cars. A woman watering her flowers didn't even glance up. A man walking his dog crossed the street without noticing. To the world, they were invisible. 2 shadows moving through the gray light of an ordinary afternoon. Inside the store, the cool air hit her skin and made her shiver. She avoided eye contact, heading straight for the pharmacy aisle. Fever reducer, that was the priority. Something, anything, to bring Jayden's temperature down. Then juice, something with sugar for Ava, and maybe crackers if there was enough money. She moved quickly, her heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed through the shelves. At self-checkout, she scanned the items and slid the bills into the machine. It wasn't enough. She removed the crackers. Still not enough. She removed the juice. Finally, the screen blinked green. She stuffed the bag into her hoodie pocket and turned to leave. That's when the manager noticed her. He hadn't seen her before and he knew most of the kids in the area. Something about her didn't sit right. The way she avoided the cameras, the baby's tangled hair, the way she flinched when the security sensor beeped as she walked through it. He didn't stop her, not then. He just watched as she disappeared down the sidewalk, carrying the little girl, walking too quickly for someone with nothing to hide. The clerk said nothing, but as soon as the doors closed behind her, he pulled out his phone. He called a tip line, just in case. "I don't know what's going on," he said, but something about that kid wasn't right. He didn't know her name, he didn't know where she came from, but in 2 days the entire country would. It didn't take long for the phone call to set things in motion. The tip was vague, just a description of a young girl carrying a toddler, looking scared and disheveled, buying medicine with crumpled bills, and leaving without saying a word. It might have gone ignored if not for the clerk's insistence. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. By the next morning, an anonymous welfare check had been requested. Local police were dispatched to the brown house at the end of Maple Street. They knocked twice. No answer. Everything was quiet. The yard was overgrown. A package sat sun-bleached on the porch. The windows were shuttered tight. The house didn't look empty, but it didn't look lived in either. After a few moments of silence, the officers stepped back. Just as they turned to leave, they heard a sound, a weak cough from inside. Then, the faintest shuffle of movement. One of the officers peered through a gap in the blinds. He couldn't see much, just the edge of a couch and something that looked like a crumpled blanket. But then the blanket moved. A face appeared, pale, thin, eyes blinking slowly. They called for backup. When officers entered the house minutes later, they were not prepared for what they found. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of damp clothes, mold, and unwashed dishes. There was no electricity. The kitchen was nearly empty, just a few rusted cans in the cupboard and a carton of spoiled milk in the warm fridge. Jayden was lying on the couch, barely conscious, his skin hot to the touch. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Upstairs, they found a makeshift bedroom with a mattress on the floor, coloring books, and a cracked tablet with no battery. In the corner, a small pile of diapers. The signs of children everywhere, but no adults. In a drawer, officers found a tattered notebook. Inside were pages written in a child's handwriting. Lists of supplies, food logs, schedules for boiling water and rationing snacks. It was clear someone had been trying to hold everything together with scraps of knowledge and sheer willpower. On one page was a chilling title, "What to Do If I Die?" followed by a set of instructions naming neighbors who might help and listing the house address. Mia and Ava returned just minutes later. The patrol cars were already parked out front, lights flashing, doors open. Mia froze at the edge of the sidewalk. Ava perched silently on her hip. Her face went white. She knew what this meant. An officer approached gently, speaking softly, trying not to startle her. But she didn't run. She didn't scream. She just asked, barely above a whisper, "Is Jayden okay?" That was the only thing she cared about. At the hospital, Jayden was treated for a severe infection. Doctors said another day or two without medical care, and he might not have made it. Mia was placed in protective custody with Ava, who clung to her sister's arm, terrified of the unfamiliar surroundings. The story spread quickly. A local news reporter picked it up within hours. 3 children found abandoned in suburban home. Within 24 hours, it was national. Images of the brown house flashed across television screens. Reporters stood at the end of Maple Street, broadcasting live in front of the now infamous address. But the most shocking part hadn't been revealed yet. Authorities ran Shana Walters' name through their system and found no records of recent activity. No recent employment, no custody agreements, no tax filings. It was as if she'd disappeared completely. Until investigators traced a car rental from nearly 3 years prior. It was connected to an apartment in another state, and when police knocked on that door, a man named Eric Delson answered. He had no idea who they were talking about. He had never even heard the name Shana Walters. Eric Delson stood in the doorway of his apartment, blinking in confusion at the officers who had just asked for a woman he didn't know by name. "Shana Walters," they said. "A mother of 3, missing, wanted for questioning in a potential felony child neglect case." Eric shook his head slowly. "No, there must be a mistake." But then they showed him a photograph, and in an instant his entire world shifted. He stared at the image, silent. He didn't speak, didn't move, because the woman in the picture, the one with the dark eyes and tight smile, was the same woman who had shared his bed for over 2 years. But she'd told him her name was Marissa Hale. She said she was an only child, said her parents were dead, said she had no ties, no history, no baggage. She created an entire life out of thin air and never once slipped up. Not even once. The officers pushed past him and entered the apartment. Shana, Marissa, was sitting on the couch, a mug of coffee in her hand, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look surprised when she saw them. Didn't scream. Didn't try to run. She just placed the mug on the table and stood slowly, her face blank, as if she'd known this day was coming all along. Back in her hometown, the media was unraveling her story like a crime novel. Neighbors who once claimed to know nothing were now eager to talk. One said he'd heard crying late at night. Another said the children had looked thin, tired, but no one had acted. No one had knocked. And now they were trying to explain away their silence. Social services released statements confirming the children had been left alone for nearly 3 years with no consistent adult care, no schooling, no medical checkups, and yet somehow they had survived. Because of Mia, that name too became known across the country. A 12-year-old girl who had taken on the role of parent, protector, provider. Reporters called her the forgotten sister. Headlines described her as a child forced to raise children. And while the world debated whether Shana Walters was a villain or simply unstable, Mia sat in a quiet child advocacy center with her siblings, clutching Ava's hand and asking over and over again the same quiet question. When do we get to go home? But there was no home left. The brown house was now a crime scene. The locks had been changed. The front yard was cordoned off with yellow tape. Inside, investigators combed through every inch, taking photographs, collecting evidence, trying to piece together how 3 children had been hidden in plain sight for so long. Shana was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, felony neglect, and abandonment. In court, she showed little emotion. Her attorney claimed mental illness, claimed trauma, claimed she had been overwhelmed and had simply snapped. But the evidence told a different story, one of planning, of deception, of cold, calculated abandonment. The trial captivated the public. Every detail of Shana's double life became fuel for headlines. Her social media pages were dissected. Photos of her smiling on beaches, sipping wine, dancing at parties, all while her children sat hungry and scared in a dark, forgotten house. Infuriated a nation, but no one was more furious than Mia, because she had waited. Every single day she had waited for the sound of the front door opening, for footsteps, for a familiar voice to call her name. She had believed, truly believed, that her mother would come back, that everything would be okay. And in the end, it wasn't the silence that hurt the most. It was the lie. Shana hadn't just left. She had chosen a new life, and in doing so erased her children from existence. But they had survived. Not because of her, but in spite of her. And as the courtroom doors closed behind Shana Walters for the final time, Mia stood quietly outside, holding her siblings close. The story wasn't just about a mother who left. It was about 3 children who refused to be forgotten.